The old fire truck was already burning when the German shepherd started clawing at the back seat. Flames snapped beneath the rusted frame as the veteran yanked open a hidden panel with numb fingers. Smoke stung his eyes. Metal groaned around him. Then the dog froze, staring into a space that shouldn't have existed inside the truck at all. What sat hidden there made him forget the fire for a moment. And that was the strangest part. What do you think the dog found? The old meeting hall smelled like wet pine, burnt coffee, and dust baked into wood over 100 Idaho winters. Russell Carter noticed all of it before he noticed the people. Habit. Some things never left a man. The folding chair creaked beneath him. Across the room, a wall clock ticked louder than it should have. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Then the door opened. The sharp squeal of metal hinges cut through the room. Russ flinched before he could stop himself. His hand moved automatically toward his right hip. Nothing there. No sidearm. Not for a long time. His fingers stopped halfway and curled into a fist. Nobody seemed to notice except Boone. The aging German shepherd lifted his head from beside Russ's chair and watched him carefully. Good dog. Always watching. Always knowing. At the front of the room, Ethan Briggs stood with his arms folded. 28 years old. Expensive jacket. Clean boots. The kind of man who had never spent a night wondering where he would sleep. We're missing $11,000, Ethan said. The room fell silent. Russ looked through the dusty window behind him. Snow covered the mountains beyond town. The peaks glowed white beneath the afternoon sun. He wished he were out there instead. Anywhere but here. Ethan slapped a stack of papers onto the table. The sound cracked through the room. Again, Russ found himself measuring distances. Front door. 8 steps. Side window. 14 feet. 2 exits. 1 blind corner. His mind built the map before he even realized he was doing it. Across the Gulf, years ago, that habit had kept men alive. Now it only reminded him how tired he was. The money disappeared 3 days ago, Ethan continued. Only a few people had access. Several faces turned toward Russ. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to feel, enough to understand. Boone let out a low breath. Russ reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck. The shepherd relaxed immediately. The room didn't. I didn't take it, Russ said. His voice stayed calm. He had learned long ago that anger never helped a man already being judged. Ethan nodded as though he had expected the answer. Funny thing, he said. You're the only person who can't account for where you were that afternoon. A few murmurs followed. Russ looked at the floorboards. He could account for every minute. He had been repairing the generator at fire station number 8, alone. Nobody had seen him, because nobody ever saw him unless something went wrong. Town Council President Martin Briggs slowly rose from his chair. Ethan's grandfather, the most respected man in town, the last person Russ had hoped might listen. Martin sighed heavily. Russ. That was all it took. The way he said the name. Not accusing. Not believing either. Just tired. Already decided. Russ felt something sink inside him. The same feeling he'd had the day the army informed him that 2 men from his unit weren't coming home. The moment before reality finished arriving. We appreciate everything you've done for this town, Martin said quietly. But until this gets sorted out. The sentence never finished. It didn't need to. The room already knew. Russ stood. His knees protested. 71 years carried weight. So did disappointment. Boone rose with him. No command needed. Never had been. Russ removed the maintenance keys from his belt and laid them carefully on the table. Not tossed, not slammed. Laid down, a small act of dignity. Maybe the last one left to him. "I understand," he said. Martin couldn't meet his eyes. Neither could anyone else. Except Boone. Boone always could. Outside, cold mountain air struck his face. The sky was turning gray. Snow clouds were moving over the Bitterroot Range. Winter coming early, again. Russ walked slowly down Main Street. People looked away when they passed him. A few nodded awkwardly. Most didn't. The hardware store, the diner, the gas station. Places where he'd spent years helping neighbors fix engines, patch roofs, clear fallen trees after storms. Funny how quickly memory disappeared. By sunset, he reached the small room he'd rented above the feed store. The landlord was waiting. That told Russ everything before a word was spoken. The man shifted nervously. "Russ." There it was again. That tone. The same one Martin had used. The same one people always used when they were about to choose comfort over loyalty. "I heard about the money." Russ said nothing. The landlord rubbed the back of his neck. "I can't have trouble here." Trouble. Not theft. Not guilt. Just trouble. As if those were the same thing. The man placed a key on the railing between them. "You need to be out by morning." For a moment, neither spoke. Wind rattled the metal roof. Somewhere down the street, a truck backfired. The sound echoed through town. Russ's shoulders tightened instantly. For half a second, he wasn't in Idaho anymore. Heat, smoke, radio chatter, a distant blast across flat desert. Then Boone pressed against his leg, solid, warm, present. The memory faded. Russ looked down. The dog stared back, waiting, ready. The landlord cleared his throat. "I'm sorry." Russ nodded once. He didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't explain. The people who wanted explanations had already made up their minds. He picked up the room key, turned it over once in his hand, then set it back down. By morning, he would have nowhere left to go, and for the first time in many years, the only living thing that still seemed certain he belonged somewhere was the old German shepherd standing beside him. Boone stayed close as darkness settled over the town. Neither of them knew it yet. But 3 nights from now, hidden inside an abandoned fire truck nobody wanted anymore, they would discover a secret powerful enough to change everything. The next morning arrived cold and gray. Russ Carter stood on the sidewalk outside the feed store with his duffel bag at his feet. Everything he owned fit inside it. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a worn sleeping bag, an old photograph of his unit from the Gulf, a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a folded American flag from his father's funeral. That was it. 71 years of life reduced to one bag. Boone sat beside him, ears alert, watching traffic move through town. People drove by without stopping. A few recognized Russ. Most pretended not to. The mountains loomed above Lead Creek, their slopes hidden beneath low clouds. Snow had begun falling sometime before dawn. Small flakes drifted through the air and settled on Boone's dark fur. Russ scratched behind the dog's ears. "Well, partner," he said quietly, "looks like it's just us." Boone leaned against his leg. That answer was enough. By noon, they were walking north along the river road. Russ had no destination, only distance. The farther he got from town, the less he had to look at faces that had already judged him. The Salmon River rolled beside them, dark and cold beneath the winter sky. Boone trotted ahead, then circled back every few minutes to check on him. The shepherd moved slower these days. Gray showed around his muzzle. His hips weren't what they used to be. Still, He never wandered far, never lost track of Russ. Around sunset, they reached the salvage yard. The place sat in a wide clearing surrounded by pine-covered hills. Rows of rusting vehicles stretched across acres of frozen ground. Farm trucks, school buses, old logging equipment, pieces of forgotten lives stacked together beneath the snow. The chain-link fence sagged in several places. Nobody seemed to care. Russ stopped outside the gate. He knew this yard. Years ago, before money became tight, the volunteer fire department had sold equipment here. He had come with them more than once. A gust of wind pushed across the valley. Boone lifted his nose, then started walking, purposefully, as if he already knew where they were going. Russ followed, past the rows of crushed pickups, past the rusted bulldozers, past a line of old fuel tanks, all the way to the farthest corner of the property. Then he saw it. The fire truck. Even from a distance, it looked lonely. Its faded red paint had turned almost brown. The department insignia had peeled away years ago. One headlight was missing. The chrome bell mounted on the front bumper was green with age. Snow rested across the roof. No tracks surrounded it. Nobody had visited in a long time. Station number 8. The words were still barely visible on the door. Russ stood still for a moment. Memories returned. Fundraisers, barbecues, community fairs, volunteer firefighters laughing after long nights, people who had believed in helping each other. Before politics, before accusations, before Ethan Briggs. Boone reached the truck first. He circled it once, then sat beside the passenger door, waiting. Russ almost laughed. Guess you've already picked our hotel. The door groaned when he pulled it open. The smell hit him immediately. Old rubber, dust, cold metal, a faint trace of smoke buried beneath decades of age. The cab was surprisingly intact. The bench seat remained in place. The dashboard was cracked, but recognizable. A few gauges still sat behind cloudy glass. Someone had cared about this truck once. A lot of people probably had. Russ climbed inside. The seat springs creaked beneath his weight. Boone jumped up beside him. For the first time since losing his room, Russ felt something close to shelter. Not comfort, just shelter. Sometimes that was enough. As darkness settled outside, he began preparing for the night. Old habits took over, without thinking, without effort. He checked sightlines through every window, measured distances to both doors, located emergency exits, identified what could serve as a weapon if someone approached. The routine felt as natural as breathing. Years earlier, in a dusty AO halfway around the world, those habits had kept men alive. Now they simply helped him sleep, or try to. The temperature dropped fast after midnight. Wind rattled against the truck's metal frame. Branches scraped somewhere outside. Boone slept lightly near the passenger door. Russ remained awake. Sleep rarely arrived quickly. Not anymore. Every sharp sound pulled him halfway upright. A snapping branch, a shifting shadow, the metallic ping of cooling steel. His eyes opened automatically, scanning, listening, waiting. At some point, he drifted off. Then a noise brought him back instantly, a low rumble, not outside, inside the truck. Russ opened his eyes. Moonlight filtered through the windshield. For a second, he wasn't sure what had woken him. Then he saw Boone. The shepherd was standing rigid beside the rear of the cab, every muscle locked, ears forward, tail still, not barking, not moving, watching, staring directly at the area behind the bench seat. A deep growl vibrated in his chest, soft, controlled, the kind Boone only made when something truly had his attention. Russ slowly sat up. His pulse quickened, not fear, curiosity. He followed the dog's gaze toward the darkness behind the seat. There was nothing there. Just shadow. Old metal. Years of dust. At least that was what it looked like. Boone took one careful step forward, then another. The growl grew slightly louder. Russ reached for his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. Dust floated through the air. The old seat. The back wall of the cab. Nothing unusual. Yet Boone refused to look away. The shepherd's eyes remained fixed on one exact spot, as if he could see something hidden behind the darkness itself. Russ lowered the flashlight. Boone had spent years working search and rescue before coming into his life. The dog had found missing hikers, lost children, an elderly hunter trapped beneath a fallen tree. Twice he had alerted rescuers to people everyone else had missed. Boone wasn't a dog who imagined things. Russ studied the area one more time, then looked back at Boone. "What is it, boy?" Boone's answer was simple. He stepped forward and placed one paw against the rear section of the seat, then scratched once, slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed softly through the abandoned truck, and for reasons Russ couldn't explain, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Outside, snow continued falling over the valley. Inside the forgotten fire truck, Boone kept staring at the same spot, as though something hidden there had been waiting a very long time to be found. Russ kept the flashlight aimed at the back of the bench seat for nearly a minute. Nothing moved. Nothing blinked. Nothing reflected the light. Just dust. Old paint. Shadow. Finally, he lowered the flashlight. "Probably a mouse," he muttered. Boone didn't agree. The German shepherd remained frozen, one paw against the seat, eyes fixed, watching, the same way he had once watched a collapsed building before rescuers discovered a trapped child beneath the rubble. Russ knew that look. He had seen it before. The dog wasn't guessing. The dog was certain. Still, it was after midnight. The temperature was dropping fast, and exhaustion had begun settling into Russ's bones. He wrapped himself tighter in his sleeping bag. Tomorrow. Boone didn't move. "Tomorrow," Russ repeated. The dog finally lay down, but he kept his head facing the seat, watching, waiting. The next morning arrived beneath a curtain of snow. Russ woke before sunrise. He always did. Some habits survived every war. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the cracked windshield, the frozen river beyond it, the rusted dashboard, the old fire truck. Reality settled back into place. Boone was already awake, staring at the same spot. Again. Russ sighed. "You're not letting this go, are you?" The dog's ear soon twitched. That was answer enough. The day passed quietly. Russ spent the morning gathering firewood from the edge of the salvage yard. He melted snow in an old coffee can, checked the truck for leaks, conserved energy, conserved food. Simple survival. By afternoon, he noticed something unusual. Boone had barely touched his food. That was not normal. The shepherd never missed a meal. Instead, he returned repeatedly to the rear of the seat, sniffing, pawing, waiting. As darkness settled over the valley, Russ finally gave in. The old truck creaked softly in the wind. Snow tapped against the windows. Boone stood immediately when Russ reached for his flashlight, as though he knew. Russ knelt beside the bench seat. The upholstery was cracked with age. The mounting bolts were rusty. Nothing looked unusual. Yet something bothered him. He couldn't say what. A feeling. The same feeling he'd learned to trust years ago when moving through uncertain ground. A detail slightly out of place. A shape that didn't belong. A silence where sound should exist. He ran his hand along the back edge of the seat, then stopped. His fingers found a narrow gap. Too narrow to notice casually. Too straight to be accidental. Russ leaned closer. The flashlight beam swept across the metal. There. One bolt looked newer than the others. Not new, just newer. Different. Someone had replaced it at some point. Boone stepped closer. His tail moved once. Slowly. Russ stared. The truck was more than 30 years old. Why replace a single bolt? His pulse quickened. Not fear. Curiosity. He dug through his duffel bag until he found a screwdriver and small wrench. Then he got to work. The first bolt came loose slowly. The second even slower. Rust fought him every inch. The cold didn't help. Neither did his stiff hands. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Finally, the last bolt dropped into his palm. The metal panel shifted. Boone stood immediately. Russ pulled harder. The panel came free, with a long metallic groan. Dust exploded into the flashlight beam. For a moment, neither moved. Behind the panel was darkness, a hollow space, a compartment, hand-built, hidden, not part of the truck's original design. Russ felt his heartbeat against his ribs. The compartment stretched several feet into the rear wall of the cab. Someone had spent serious time creating it, and someone had worked very hard to make sure nobody found it. Until now. Boone pushed forward first. His nose disappeared into the opening. He sniffed carefully, then looked back at Russ, almost impatiently. Russ swallowed, reached inside. His fingers touched canvas. He froze, then slowly pulled. Something heavy slid across metal. A long scraping sound echoed through the truck. Out came an old canvas bag, dark with age, covered in dust. Military surplus, maybe, or old firefighter gear. The material felt stiff beneath his fingers. Russ carefully set it on the bench seat. Neither he nor Boone looked away. The bag had clearly been hidden decades ago. Maybe longer. A leather strap secured the top. The buckle had turned green with corrosion. Russ worked it loose. His fingers shook slightly. Not from the cold. The strap finally released. The flap opened. The first thing he saw was a worn leather journal, then a tarnished firefighter badge, several photographs, a folded map, and an old brass key attached to a faded tag. For several seconds, the truck felt impossibly quiet. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Russ picked up the badge first. His flashlight reflected off the metal. Most of the lettering had faded, but one name remained readable. Jack Mercer. Russ stopped breathing for a moment. The name hit him like a punch. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he reached for one of the photographs. The edges were burned. The image faded. Yet the face remained visible. A younger man stood beside a fire engine. Tall, broad-shouldered, smiling. Russ stared, then looked again. His hands tightened around the photograph. Because he knew that face, or thought he did. 25 years earlier, Jack Mercer had vanished from Lead Creek without explanation. Most people assumed he was dead. Others said he ran. Nobody seemed to know. Nobody seemed to care anymore. But Russ remembered. Everyone had known Jack once. And now here he was, hidden behind the seat of a forgotten fire truck, waiting. The journal lay untouched beside him, its cover worn smooth by time. Whatever answers existed were inside. Russ reached for it. Outside, snow continued falling across the mountains. Inside the truck, Boone sat quietly beside him. The dog had done his job. He had found what nobody else had. Now it was Russ's turn. He opened the journal, and everything began to change. The first page crackled softly beneath Russ's fingers. The paper had yellowed with age. The leather cover smelled faintly of smoke and cedar. Someone had carried this journal for years, maybe decades. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, not elegant, just honest. The kind of writing made by a man who expected every word to matter. Russ angled the flashlight closer. The first entry was dated July 18th, 1997, 2 weeks before the Black Pine Fire. He remembered that fire. Everyone in Idaho remembered it. For 3 days, the mountains had burned. Entire ridges glowed red at night. The sky turned orange for nearly a week. Thousands of acres vanished beneath flames. Russ read silently. At first, the entries seemed ordinary. Maintenance reports, fire calls, equipment inspections, names of volunteers, stories about long nights and bad coffee. Jack Mercer loved Station 8. That much became obvious immediately. Every page carried traces of it. Then the tone changed. A later entry mentioned a meeting at Town Hall. Another mentioned pressure from local officials. Then another. The words grew heavier, more cautious, as though Jack knew someone might someday read them. Russ turned another page and stopped. The date at the top read, August 2nd, 1997, the day the Black Pine Fire exploded across the mountains. Outside the truck, wind pushed snow against the windows. Inside, Russ read, the fire started farther north than anyone expected. Jack described flames racing through dry timber faster than any prediction. Families trapped, roads blocked, radio traffic collapsing under panic. Volunteer crews overwhelmed. Russ could almost see it, almost hear it. The journal brought everything alive. The smell of smoke seemed to rise from the pages themselves. Then one paragraph made him sit up straighter. The Briggs family was mentioned for the first time. Not Ethan, his father, Thomas Briggs. Back then he had been a rising local politician. Jack's words became sharper. Thomas had ordered emergency response redirected away from an isolated valley. The reason wasn't public safety. It was money. A planned timber development. Several wealthy landowners stood to lose property if firefighters shifted efforts elsewhere. Jack had refused. The argument nearly ended in a fistfight. Russ turned the page, then another. The next entries became increasingly disturbing. Reports disappeared. Witness statements changed. Official timelines stopped matching reality. Jack kept writing, kept documenting, kept saving copies, as if he knew what was coming. A gust of wind slammed against the side of the truck. The sudden bang echoed through the metal. Russ jerked violently. The flashlight slipped from his hand. For one terrible second, he wasn't inside an abandoned fire truck. He was back in Kuwait. Night. Darkness. Incoming mortar rounds. The distant whistle before impact. The instinctive certainty that something terrible was about to happen. His breathing accelerated. The cab seemed smaller. The darkness closer. Then a warm weight touched his knee. Boone. The shepherd had moved beside him without a sound. His head rested across Russ's leg. Solid. Present. Real. Russ stared at the windshield until the memory loosened its grip. Snow. River. Mountains. Idaho. Not Kuwait. Not anymore. Boone didn't move. He simply stayed there, waiting, the way he always did. Eventually, Russ reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. Good boy. Boone's tail thumped once against the floor. Russ picked up the flashlight again and continued reading. The final entries had been written years later. The handwriting looked older, less steady. Jack described being blamed for decisions he never made. Investigations, newspaper stories, public outrage. One line had been underlined twice. Sometimes people don't need the truth. They only need someone to blame. Russ stared at those words longer than he meant to, because he understood them better than most. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the truck, two men separated by decades seemed to be having the same conversation. One through ink, one through silence. Near the end of the journal, a folded newspaper clipping fell into Russ's lap. The article headline had faded, but not completely. Former fire captain resigns amid controversy. Below it was a photograph. Jack Mercer, older, tired, standing alone outside Station 8. Russ looked from the article to the photograph he had found in the hidden compartment. The difference was striking. The younger Jack looked confident. The older Jack looked hunted, like a man carrying a weight nobody else could see. The final pages of the journal contained fewer entries, more gaps between dates. Then came the last one. Only half a page, written with a shaking hand. Russ read every word carefully. If you're reading this, I was right. Someone finally found the truck. The truth is still buried. The people responsible still carry the family name Briggs. Trust evidence. Trust records. Trust what can be proven. Never trust what they're willing to say in public, because they've spent 30 years rewriting what happened. Then came the final sentence, a single line written darker than all the others, as though Jack had pressed the pen into the paper with everything he had left. If anyone finds this, don't trust the Briggs family. The cab fell silent. Even Boone seemed still. Russ slowly closed the journal. The name Briggs echoed in his thoughts. Martin Briggs, Ethan Briggs, the family that had just destroyed his life. The same family Jack Mercer had warned about decades earlier. Coincidence? Maybe, but Russ had survived long enough to respect patterns, and this pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Boone suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the windshield. Alert. Listening. Russ immediately noticed. The shepherd never reacted without reason. Outside, beyond the falling snow, a pair of headlights briefly appeared between rows of rusting vehicles, then disappeared. Russ froze. The salvage yard should have been empty, at least at this hour. Boone rose quietly to his feet, not barking, watching, the same way he had watched the hidden compartment, the same way he watched danger. Somewhere out in the darkness, someone had just entered the salvage yard, and for the first time since finding Jack Mercer's journal, Russ had the uneasy feeling that he wasn't the only person looking for answers. He switched off the flashlight immediately. The cab plunged into darkness. Only moonlight filtered through the windshield. Beside him, Boone remained perfectly still. The old shepherd wasn't growling. That worried Russ more. Boone only stayed this quiet when he was listening. Really listening. Russ eased forward and peered through a narrow gap in the windshield. Nothing. Only snow drifting through pale moonlight. Then movement. A shadow crossed between two rusted pickup trucks nearly 70 yards away. Gone almost immediately. Russ lowered himself beneath the dashboard. Instinct. Years ago, he would have called it reducing his profile. Now it was simply habit. The same habit that made him park facing exits. The same habit that made him notice unfamiliar vehicles. The same habit that kept him alive long after younger men had trusted luck. A faint crunch echoed across the salvage yard. Boots on snow, not many. One person. Maybe two. Russ listened carefully. The sound came again. Closer. Then stopped. Boone's ears shifted. Tracking. The dog knew exactly where the person stood. Several long minutes passed. No more movement. No voices. No flashlight beams. Nothing. That silence bothered Russ more than footsteps. Eventually the sound faded, retreating, moving away toward the front gate. Only after another 10 minutes did Boone finally relax. The shepherd lowered himself onto the floor, but he didn't sleep. Neither did Russ. The journal remained beside him. Jack Mercer's warning replayed endlessly inside his head. Don't trust the Briggs family. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the truck, questions multiplied. The next morning dawned bright and bitterly cold. The mountains glowed beneath fresh snow. Smoke rose from chimneys in the distant town. Russ climbed out of the truck and stretched carefully. Every joint complained. Boone followed. The shepherd moved stiffly at first, then settled into his usual stride. Russ walked the salvage yard perimeter before breakfast. A routine. Observation first, food second, always. His boots left fresh tracks through untouched snow. About 50 yards from the truck, he stopped. Someone else's tracks crossed his. Large boots. Recent. Very recent. Russ crouched. The impressions were deep. A heavier man, probably over 200 pounds. The tread pattern looked familiar. Work boots, not hiking boots, not hunting boots. He followed them for 20 yards. The trail ended near a row of crushed sedans. From there, the person had doubled back, carefully, trying not to leave an obvious route. Russ stared for a moment. That detail told him something important. Curious people wandered. People hiding something covered their tracks. Boone sniffed the prints, then lifted his head toward town. The dog's body stiffened, watching. Again. Russ followed the direction of Boone's gaze. A black pickup sat on a ridge road nearly half a mile away, far enough to seem accidental, close enough to watch. The truck remained there for less than a minute, then disappeared. Russ never saw the driver, but he saw enough. Someone was paying attention. Over the next 2 days, the black pickup appeared 3 more times, always distant, always watching, never approaching. Boone noticed it every single time, before Russ, every single time. By the third appearance, Russ stopped believing in coincidences. He adjusted accordingly. Instead of taking direct routes to the river, he varied his paths. Instead of returning to the truck immediately, he circled through different sections of the salvage yard. Old military habits resurfaced naturally. Observe. Adapt. Never establish a predictable pattern. One afternoon, he spotted fresh cigarette butts near the rear fence, the same location where the pickup could observe the truck unnoticed. Another day, he found a crushed soda can, still cold, still recent. Someone had been sitting there, waiting, watching. The realization settled heavily. Whatever Jack Mercer had hidden wasn't forgotten. Someone else knew enough to be interested. Maybe not everything, but enough. That night, Russ reread sections of the journal. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Thomas Briggs, county officials, missing reports, altered records. The deeper he looked, the worse it seemed. Near midnight, Boone suddenly stood, alert, listening. Russ followed instantly. No hesitation. The shepherd moved toward the passenger side window. His nose lifted, testing the air. Then came a smell, faint, but unmistakable. Gasoline. Russ froze. His heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. A strange thing happened after enough years in dangerous places. Panic stopped being useful. Focus took its place. He slid silently from the bench seat. Boone remained beside him. The smell grew stronger. Fresh fuel. Close. Very close. Russ moved toward the door. Carefully. Quietly. The night outside looked calm. Too calm. He reached for the handle. Paused. Listened. Nothing. Not even wind. Every instinct he possessed began screaming. Wrong. Something was wrong. Then Boone's head snapped toward the front bumper. And at that exact moment, Russ saw the brief orange flicker of a lighter flame moving in the darkness outside. Someone wasn't just watching anymore. Someone had come to erase the truck forever, and they were about to set it on fire. The orange flame flickered once in the darkness, then disappeared. Russ didn't hesitate. Years ago, hesitation could get people killed. His hand found Boone's collar. The shepherd was already tense beneath his fingers, ready, waiting. The smell of gasoline drifted through the cracked cab windows. Strong now, fresh. Someone had poured it recently. Russ eased the passenger door open an inch. Cold air slipped inside. Snow swirled through the gap. He listened. Nothing. Then came a soft metallic click. A lighter. Outside. Close. Too close. Boone's ears snapped forward. The dog let out a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the truck floor. Russ peeked through the opening. A shadow moved near the front bumper. Bulky coat. Heavy boots. Face hidden. The man crouched beside the truck. One arm extended. Another brief flare from the lighter. The gasoline caught instantly. Flames raced beneath the truck like water running downhill. Orange light exploded across the snow. Damn it! Russ threw the door open. The shadow jerked upright. For a split second, they stared at each other. Then Boone launched. The old shepherd hit the ground running. The stranger cursed, turned, started to flee. Boone reached him first. Not a full attack. Not a bite. Just enough force to knock him off balance. The man stumbled backward into a pile of scrap metal. Something crashed loudly. Then the stranger swung a length of pipe. Russ saw it happen. Saw Boone twist away. Too late. The metal struck a rusted panel beside the dog. A jagged shard broke free. The fragment slashed across Boone's shoulder. The shepherd yelped. A sound Russ had heard only a handful of times. The sound hit harder than any punch. The stranger bolted, gone between rows of abandoned vehicles, disappearing into darkness. Boone tried to follow. His front leg buckled. Russ was already moving. The flames beneath the truck had spread. Fire licked across old grease and gasoline. The heat intensified rapidly. Russ scanned automatically. Locate equipment. Assess threat. Act. His eyes landed on an old fire extinguisher mounted beside the rear compartment. Station 8. Even now she was trying to save herself. Russ sprinted, ripped it free, pulled the pin. White chemical powder blasted across the growing flames. The fire resisted, then weakened, then slowly died. Steam hissed upward into the night. The truck survived, barely. Russ dropped the extinguisher and turned immediately toward Boone. The shepherd sat in the snow, breathing hard. Blood stained the fur along his shoulder, dark against white snow. For a moment, neither moved. Then Boone stood, walked toward Russ, and leaned against him. The simple trust of it nearly broke something inside the old veteran. "Easy, buddy." His voice sounded rough. Easy. An hour later, they sat inside the truck. A lantern glowed softly on the dashboard. Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, Russ worked carefully. Needle, thread, bandages. The same steady hands that had patched wounded soldiers decades earlier now stitched a German shepherd. Boone never complained, never snapped, never pulled away. He simply rested his head in Russ's lap, trusting him completely. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it was deep. Deep enough to leave a scar. Russ tied off the final stitch, then sat quietly for a long time. Neither spoke. The wind tapped against the truck. The lantern flickered. Boone finally drifted to sleep, his breathing slow, steady, safe. Russ watched him, The dog had charged into danger without hesitation. Again. Because that's what he always did. Because somewhere along the way, Boone had decided Russ was worth protecting. The thought settled heavily in his chest. A memory surfaced. Not Iraq. Not Kuwait. Something older. A young corporal named Danny Reyes, 22 years old, always first through a doorway, always covering someone else. The kind of man who never made it home. Russ stared at the sleeping shepherd. You stubborn fool. Boone's ear twitched, half asleep. Russ reached down and scratched gently behind it, then said something he had never said before, not even once. Thanks, brother. The word slipped out naturally, as if it had been waiting. Boone opened one eye, looked at him, then went back to sleep, satisfied. Near dawn, Russ stepped outside to inspect the scene. The burned snow around the truck had frozen into black crust. Footprints crossed the yard. Most had been ruined by weather. Most, not all. Near the front bumper, he found something lying beneath a drift. A silver lighter. Heavy. Expensive. Definitely not something a drifter would carry. Russ picked it up, turned it over. The engraved symbol on the side immediately caught his attention. A stylized mountain crest. Crossed axes. The Briggs family emblem. The same logo hanging inside the council building. The same logo stamped onto Ethan Briggs's business cards. Russ stared at it for several long seconds. The wind moved softly through the salvage yard. The mountains stood silent beyond the river. The attack suddenly felt less random, less desperate, more deliberate. Someone wasn't simply trying to destroy an abandoned fire truck. Someone wanted what was hidden inside it, and they were willing to burn the evidence to make sure nobody ever saw it. Russ slipped the lighter into his pocket, then looked back toward the truck, toward Boone, toward Jack Mercer's journal, toward the secrets waiting to be uncovered. The old fire truck stood black against the rising dawn, scarred, weathered, still standing, much like the two souls sheltering inside it. But now the game had changed. Someone had shown their hand, and somewhere in Lead Creek, a member of the Briggs family had just made a very serious mistake. Russ slept only a few hours after the fire, not because he wanted to stay awake, because sleep had never asked permission before leaving him. The wind rattled the old fire truck through most of the night. Several times he woke reaching for equipment that wasn't there. Once he sat upright, heart pounding, convinced he had heard radio chatter. For a moment he could almost smell diesel fuel and desert dust. Then Boone's slow breathing pulled him back. The salvage yard, the river, the snow. Reality settled into place again. Morning arrived beneath a pale winter sun. The mountains looked sharp enough to cut the sky. Russ sat on the truck's bumper drinking instant coffee heated over a small camp stove. Boone rested beside him. The bandage on the dog's shoulder showed a faint stain of red, but he was healing. Strong dog. Stubborn dog. The kind that refused to quit. Russ understood that kind. He opened Jack Mercer's journal once more. This time he focused on the map. The folded sheet had been hidden beneath several pages near the back. Years of folding had nearly worn the paper apart. He spread it carefully across the truck's hood. Lines crossed ridges, old logging roads, streams, elevation marks. Nothing unusual at first. Then he noticed a symbol, a small red circle, hand-drawn, far north of Lead Creek, deep inside National Forest land. The location wasn't marked by name, only initials. BP Russ studied them, then looked toward the mountains. Black pine. The same fire. The same place Jack kept writing about. A second notation sat beside the circle. 3 words. Below Lookout Tower. Russ stared at them for a long time. Boone nudged his elbow. The shepherd's nose touched the map. Then the dog looked toward the mountains too, almost as if he understood. "Looks like we're taking a trip, partner." Boone's tail tapped the truck once. Decision made. They left before noon. Russ carried the journal, the map, the key, and the lighter. Everything else remained hidden inside the truck. The climb began gradually. Then the terrain changed. Steeper, rockier, less forgiving. Snow covered most of the old logging roads. Several had nearly disappeared beneath fallen timber and brush. Boone led whenever the path became unclear. His nose often found the route before Russ could. Hours passed. The farther they traveled, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no voices, no town. Only wind moving through pine trees. By late afternoon, Russ noticed something else. Silence had a way of making memories louder. A distant crack from a falling branch instantly reminded him of rifle fire. The sharp reflection of sunlight off ice pulled him back to desert mornings. Every now and then he caught himself scanning ridgelines, checking approaches, watching high ground, old habits. The mountains didn't care how many years had passed. Neither did memory. Near sunset, they stopped beside a narrow creek. The water ran black beneath ice. Russ filled 2 bottles, then filtered the water through equipment he had carried since his army days. Boone drank first. Always. Russ wouldn't have admitted it aloud, but he trusted the dog more than most people. They made camp beneath a cluster of pines. No fire. Too visible. Instead, Russ ate cold beans from a can and shared jerky with Boone. Darkness settled quickly. The temperature dropped even faster. Boone slept lightly. Russ slept less. Several times he woke and listened, not because he heard anything, because silence itself felt suspicious. Years of training had taught him something simple. The wilderness rarely stayed completely quiet. Around midnight, Boone suddenly lifted his head, alert, watching. Russ was awake instantly. No confusion, no hesitation. The dog stared toward the trees. A full minute passed, then another. Nothing emerged. Eventually, Boone relaxed. But Russ noticed something. Fresh tracks. Just beyond camp, half covered by snow. Human tracks. Not theirs. His pulse slowed. Focus replacing surprise. Someone had passed through recently. Very recently. Heading in the same direction they were. Toward Black Pine. Toward the old lookout. Toward whatever Jack Mercer had hidden. The next morning they reached the upper ridges. The old lookout tower appeared shortly after noon, or what remained of it. The structure leaned heavily against the mountainside. Weather and time had nearly destroyed it. One wall had collapsed completely. The observation deck hung crooked above the trees. Snow filled the gaps where windows once stood. Russ climbed the final stretch slowly. Boone stayed close. The shepherd's injured shoulder clearly bothered him now. Yet he never complained, never stopped. When they finally reached the tower, Russ pulled out the map. The red circle sat directly beneath their location. Below Lookout Tower. Those words again. He studied the ground. Nothing obvious. Just snow. Rock. Dead grass. Boone began sniffing immediately. Back and forth. Around the tower. Under broken beams. Through fallen debris. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Russ found nothing. The dog did. A sharp bark echoed across the mountains. Russ turned. Boone stood beside a patch of snow near the tower foundation, pawing aggressively, digging. Snow flew behind him, then dirt, then gravel. The shepherd ignored the pain in his shoulder, kept digging. Something had his attention, something important. Russ hurried over. Together they cleared away the remaining dirt. A hard metallic sound echoed beneath Boone's paw. Clang. Both froze. Russ brushed away the last layer of soil. A rusted steel surface emerged from the earth. Flat, circular, man-made. His heartbeat quickened. Boone stepped back, panting, watching, waiting. Russ cleared more dirt. A heavy steel hatch slowly revealed itself beneath decades of earth and snow. At its center sat a keyhole. Old, weathered, waiting. Russ reached into his jacket, slowly pulled out the brass key from Jack Mercer's hidden compartment. The key fit perfectly. And somewhere deep beneath the mountain, something that had remained hidden for nearly 30 years was finally about to be opened. Russ turned the brass key slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a dull, metallic click echoed beneath the frozen ground. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the mountain silence. Boone immediately lifted his head, watching, listening. The old shepherd's breath drifted into the cold air in pale clouds. Russ pulled on the hatch handle. It resisted. Decades of rust fought back. He pulled harder. The steel groaned, then shifted. A seam appeared. Cold air escaped from below, air that smelled of dirt, metal, and time. The hatch opened only halfway before snow and debris blocked it. Russ knelt beside it. The opening revealed a narrow concrete shaft descending several feet underground. At the bottom sat a steel box. Not enormous, not buried treasure, just a heavy industrial safe, the kind built to survive fire, the kind built to survive decades. Jack Mercer hadn't trusted banks. He hadn't trusted politicians. So he had trusted a mountain. Russ climbed carefully into the shaft. His knees protested every inch. Boone whined from above. The dog hated being separated. "I'm fine," Russ said. Boone clearly disagreed. The safe stood directly in front of him. Rust covered much of its surface, yet the lock remained intact. A second keyhole waited beneath a protective plate. Russ searched through the contents of the canvas bag. 3 minutes later, he found another key hidden inside an envelope. He stared at it. Jack had planned everything, every step, every discovery, almost as if he had expected someone to come looking. Russ inserted the key. The lock turned immediately. The heavy door opened. For several seconds, he simply stared. Not because of money. There wasn't any. Not because of gold. There wasn't any of that either. What sat inside was far more dangerous. Boxes, folders, records, evidence, truth, carefully organized, meticulously preserved, waiting. Russ carried everything to the surface. The afternoon sun was already sliding toward the western peaks. Boone sat beside him while he began sorting through the files. The first folder contained official fire reports from Black Pine. The second contained witness statements. The third contained handwritten notes from Jack Mercer. The deeper Russ read, the colder he felt. Not from the weather, from what the documents revealed. The official version of the Black Pine fire had always blamed Jack Mercer. According to public records, Jack had ignored orders, mismanaged resources, delayed evacuations. His mistakes supposedly caused property losses worth millions. That story had followed him for decades. The files told a different story. A very different story. Witness statements described Jack saving entire neighborhoods. Firefighters praised his decisions. Emergency radio transcripts showed he repeatedly warned county officials that lives were at risk. Then Russ found the financial records. His stomach tightened. Several weeks before the fire, land connected to Thomas Briggs had been purchased through shell companies. Thousands of acres, exactly where emergency resources had been diverted, exactly where the fire eventually spread. The pattern became impossible to ignore. People had made money, a lot of money, and someone needed a scapegoat. Jack Mercer had become that scapegoat. Russ sat back against a fallen log. The mountain wind moved through the pines. Boone rested beside him. For a long time, neither moved. The sun slowly disappeared behind the ridgeline. Shadows stretched across the snow. Russ opened another folder. Inside sat dozens of letters. Most were never mailed. Every one written by Jack. Some addressed to attorneys, some to journalists, some to state investigators. All telling the same story. All ignored. One line appeared repeatedly. The truth isn't disappearing. It's being buried. Russ stared at those words. Buried. Like this safe. Like these records. Like Jack Mercer himself. The realization settled heavily over him. Jack hadn't hidden these documents because he wanted revenge. He had hidden them because nobody listened. The mountain had become the last witness willing to keep his secrets. As darkness approached, Russ built a small fire in a sheltered clearing. The flames crackled softly. Boone lay close enough to feel the warmth. The bandage on his shoulder looked better. Healing. Slowly. Like everything else. Russ opened a can of stew, shared part of it with Boone, then sat staring into the fire. The silence felt different now, less lonely, more thoughtful. After a while, he reached into his duffel bag, pulled out a faded photograph. A young soldier smiled back at him. 23 years old, strong, confident, alive. Danny Reyes, the friend he couldn't save, the friend who never came home. Boone lifted his head, watching. Russ looked at the photograph for a long time, then finally spoke. Not because anyone asked, because the darkness sometimes loosened things that daylight kept locked away. He was better than me. The fire crackled. Boone listened. He always volunteered first. Russ rubbed his thumb across the edge of the picture. We hit contact near the border. Everything happened fast. The mountains remained silent. The dog remained silent. Russ continued anyway. I got out. His voice lowered. He didn't. The words disappeared into the night. No tears came. None were needed. The silence afterward carried more weight than grief ever could. Boone eventually moved closer, rested his head on Russ's boot. Nothing dramatic, just enough. A reminder that not every loss ended with someone leaving. Russ stared into the fire, then reached for another document. A single folded letter, different from the others. Older, more worn. Across the front, Jack Mercer had written only 3 words. If I'm alive. Russ frowned, carefully unfolded it. The first paragraph made him sit upright. The second made his heartbeat quicken. By the third, he was no longer breathing normally. Because according to the letter, Jack Mercer might not have died 30 years ago. He might have survived. And somewhere beyond these mountains, there might still be one person alive who knew exactly what happened at Black Pine. Boone lifted his head immediately. The shepherd sensed the change. Russ looked toward the dark ridgeline, toward the distant lights of Lead Creek far below, toward the possibility that everything he thought he knew was wrong. And for the first time since opening the safe, hope entered the story. Russ barely slept. The letter remained folded beside him all night. The fire burned low. The mountain wind moved through the trees. Boone slept with his head across Russ's boot. Every now and then the shepherd twitched in his dreams, running somewhere, chasing something, protecting someone. Even asleep, Boone never seemed entirely off duty. Russ understood that. Some jobs never really ended. Dawn arrived pale and cold. The eastern sky slowly brightened behind endless ridges of pine-covered mountains. Russ opened the letter again. The final paragraphs contained a name. Harold Quinn. Station 8. If anything happens to me, Harold knows the rest. Those words had been written in Jack Mercer's unmistakable hand. Underneath was an address. Not current. Old. Nearly 15 years old. Still, it was more than Russ had yesterday. By mid-morning they were descending the mountain. The safe's contents were packed carefully inside waterproof bags. The journal remained close to his chest. Boone walked beside him. The shepherd moved slower now. The injury still bothered him. Yet every time Russ stopped to rest, Boone remained standing, watching the trees, watching the ridges, watching everything. 3 separate times during the descent, Russ noticed signs that bothered him. Fresh boot prints, broken branches, tire tracks near an abandoned logging road. The same uneasy feeling returned. Someone had been searching these mountains recently. Someone who knew enough to look, but not enough to find what Jack Mercer had hidden. Not yet. The address led them back toward civilization, then beyond it, far beyond. Harold Quinn no longer lived at the old location. The farmhouse had been abandoned for years. Paint peeled from the walls, windows boarded shut. The mailbox hung crooked beside the road. For a moment, Russ thought the trail had ended. Then a neighbor recognized the name. Harold? The old rancher adjusted his hat. He's still alive somehow. The man laughed softly. Toughest firefighter Lead Creek ever produced. Where is he now? Nursing home up on Granite Ridge. The rancher pointed toward distant hills. Been there about 3 years. Russ thanked him, then looked down at Boone. The shepherd's tail moved once. Another lead, another direction, another reason to keep moving. Granite Ridge Care Center sat high above the valley, a simple brick building surrounded by snow-covered pines. The place felt quiet, peaceful, the sort of place where time moved slower. Russ parked his borrowed truck and sat for a moment. Nerves surprised him. Not fear. Something else. Expectation. The feeling that comes before opening a door you know will change something. Boone climbed out beside him. Together they walked inside. The receptionist smiled immediately, mostly at Boone. Can I help you? I'm looking for Harold Quinn. The woman glanced toward a hallway. Room 214. Then she paused. Family? Russ considered the question. No. Then after a moment, maybe a friend of a friend. Harold Quinn sat beside a window overlooking the mountains. 92 years old. Thin, white-haired, wrapped in a blanket. Yet there was something powerful still visible beneath the years. The posture, the eyes, the stubbornness. Old firefighters carried themselves differently, just like old soldiers. Harold looked up when Russ entered, then immediately noticed Boone. A faint smile appeared. Good dog. Boone walked forward without hesitation, rested his head against the old man's knee. Harold scratched behind the shepherd's ears. Perfect strangers. Instant trust. That told Russ something. Then Harold's eyes shifted toward the fire badge resting in Russ's hand. Everything changed. The old man's smile vanished. His fingers froze. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he whispered 2 words. Jack Mercer. Russ nodded. The room became very quiet. Harold slowly reached for the badge. His hands trembled. Not from age, from memory. He kept this all these years. Russ handed him the journal. Harold opened it, read one page, then another. His jaw tightened. A tear slipped down his weathered cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Lord. His voice cracked. Jack. You stubborn fool. Boone remained beside him, silent, steady, present. The old firefighter stared out the window for a long time, toward mountains he probably hadn't climbed in decades. Then he finally spoke. Everyone thinks Jack disappeared. Russ nodded. They do. Harold looked down at the journal. They're wrong. The words landed heavily. Russ leaned forward. So what happened? Harold took a slow breath, then another. His eyes remained fixed on the mountains. Jack never betrayed anyone. The old firefighter's voice grew steadier. That's the lie they sold. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Inside, decades of silence began breaking apart. People were threatened after Black Pine. Harold continued. Witnesses, families, folks who knew too much. Russ listened carefully. Every word mattered. Jack realized the pressure wasn't stopping. Harold's hands tightened around the journal, so he made a choice. What choice? Harold's eyes closed briefly. A sacrifice. The room seemed smaller suddenly. He disappeared on purpose. Russ frowned. Why? Because as long as everyone focused on him, they stopped focusing on the others. The old firefighter looked exhausted now, like a man lifting a burden he'd carried too long. He protected people by becoming the villain. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that changes a room. Then came the twist neither Russ nor Boone expected. Harold opened a drawer beside his chair, reached inside, and carefully removed an old cassette tape. Its label had faded nearly white. Only 3 words remained readable. For when it's time. Harold held it like something sacred. Jack left this with me. His voice softened. He told me if the truth ever started coming out. The old man looked directly at Russ. Then someone would eventually come carrying that badge. Russ stared at the cassette. His heartbeat quickened. Another piece, another secret, another voice waiting from the past. Then Harold delivered the final shock. Jack Mercer didn't die 30 years ago. Russ froze. Harold nodded slowly. He lived under another name. The old firefighter looked toward the mountains again. He only passed away 11 months ago. The room fell silent. Boone lifted his head. Russ couldn't speak. Because the man whose story had brought him this far, the man everyone believed was long dead, had been alive almost the entire time. And somewhere inside the cassette resting in Harold Quinn's hands was the final truth Jack Mercer had spent a lifetime protecting. The tape recorder looked older than Boone. A small silver machine sat on a table beside Harold's bed. Its plastic casing had yellowed with age. One corner was held together with electrical tape. Harold smiled faintly when he noticed Russ studying it. Jack hated throwing things away. The old firefighter carefully inserted the cassette. The machine clicked, then hummed. For a few seconds, only static filled the room. The soft hiss of magnetic tape turning through old gears. Then a voice emerged. Weak, older, but steady. Jack Mercer. Russ had never heard him speak before, yet somehow he knew immediately. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even Boone lifted his head. The old shepherd remained beside son Harold's chair, listening. My name is Jack Mercer. The recording crackled softly. If you're hearing this, then one of 2 things happened. A brief pause. Either somebody finally found the truth, another pause, or somebody tried very hard to destroy it. Harold lowered his eyes. Russ listened without moving. Outside the nursing home windows, snow drifted across the mountains. Inside, a dead man's voice crossed nearly 3 decades. Jack began slowly, carefully, methodically. The way firefighters delivered difficult news, the way soldiers notified families, without drama, without exaggeration, just truth. He described Black Pine, the political pressure, the land deals, the falsified reports, the missing evidence, everything Russ had already begun uncovering. But the tape went further, much further. Names, dates, bank records, witnesses. Jack had spent years documenting everything, every lie, every cover-up, every person involved. At one point, the recording stopped briefly while Jack coughed. The sound felt painfully human. Not a legend, not a symbol, just a tired old man who had carried too much for too long. Then came the part that changed everything. The Briggs family never stopped. Russ sat forward. Harold's hands tightened around the armrests. Even Boone seemed alert. Jack continued. People think corruption happens once. A faint laugh escaped the speaker. It doesn't. The tape crackled again. It becomes tradition. The room fell silent. Jack named Thomas Briggs directly, then described how money disappeared from community projects for years afterward. Different methods, different accounts, same family, same pattern. Then came another long pause. When Jack spoke again, his voice sounded even older, even more tired. If Ethan Briggs is involved in town business by the time this tape is heard. Russ exchanged a look with Harold. Neither spoke. Watch him carefully. The recorder hummed softly. People become what they grow up around. Another pause. Then Jack delivered the final blow. 3 years before his death, Jack had hired a private investigator. Quietly, secretly. The investigator uncovered evidence that Ethan had already begun siphoning money from several local projects. Nothing large enough to attract attention. Not yet. Practice runs, tests, rehearsals. Jack had documented all of it. The evidence sat inside another folder hidden with the safe documents. Russ remembered seeing it. He had not opened it yet. Now he understood why. The old firefighter had anticipated everything. Even this. Even Ethan. Harold slowly shook his head. Dear God. The tape continued. If you're hearing this. Then Ethan finally got bold. The words seemed to echo through the room. He always reminded me of Thomas. Jack's voice hardened. Same smile. Same hunger. Same belief that rules only exist for other people. Russ felt his jaw tighten. The accusation against him. The missing community funds. The fire at the truck. Suddenly the pieces aligned. The pattern was unmistakable. The tape played for nearly 40 more minutes. By the end, Jack sounded exhausted, yet relieved, like a man finally setting down a burden. The final section became personal. No more evidence. No more names. Just reflection. If you're listening to this, Harold. The old firefighter beside them looked away. Thank you. Silence filled the room, then Jack continued. And if someone else found this first? A long pause followed. If you're carrying this story now, then you're carrying more than documents. The tape hissed softly. You're carrying people. Russ stared at the recorder. The words landed harder than he expected. Jack's voice lowered. Don't let anger drive you. Truth is stronger. The tape clicked once, then ended. The machine fell silent. No one spoke for several minutes. Snow drifted outside. The heating vents hummed quietly overhead. Harold finally wiped his eyes, not hiding it, not apologizing. 92 years old and still grieving a friend. Russ understood that too. Some losses stayed with you, no matter how much time passed. Boone rose carefully and crossed the room. The shepherd placed his head on Harold's knee. The old firefighter smiled sadly. Jack would have liked you. Boone's tail moved once. The simple gesture eased the heaviness in the room. For a moment. Only a moment. Then reality returned. The evidence. The Briggs family. The fire. The accusations. Harold looked toward Russ. When are they crushing the truck? Tomorrow morning. The old firefighter's expression darkened immediately. That soon? Russ nodded. The answer seemed to age Harold another year, because they both understood what that truck represented. Not just metal, not just history. Proof memory. Jack Mercer himself. Harold slowly rose from his chair. The effort looked painful, yet determination replaced fatigue. I'm going. Russ blinked. Harold, I'm going. The old firefighter's voice carried surprising force. That truck carried us through 20 years of service. He grabbed the edge of his walker. And I'm not letting them destroy her without a fight. Outside, the winter sun was already fading. Tomorrow morning, the crusher, the evidence, the truth. Everything was rushing toward a collision. And for the first time since finding the hidden compartment, Russ realized the ending was no longer weeks away. It was less than 24 hours away. By sunrise, Lead Creek would either learn the truth or watch it get crushed into scrap metal forever. The sky was still dark when Russ started the truck. Snow drifted across the road in thin ribbons. The mountains stood silent beneath a fading moon. Beside him sat Boone. The German shepherd watched the highway through the passenger window. His injured shoulder had stiffened overnight. But when Russ opened the truck door that morning, Boone climbed inside without hesitation. Some journeys mattered too much to miss. In the back seat sat Harold Quinn, 92 years old, wrapped in 2 blankets, holding Jack Mercer's badge in both hands. Neither man spoke much during the drive. The road wound through frozen valleys and pine-covered ridges. Every mile carried them closer to a confrontation decades in the making. By the time they reached the salvage yard, the sun had begun creeping over the eastern peaks. And they were not the first to arrive. Half the town seemed to be there. Pickup trucks lined the access road. People stood in small groups drinking coffee from paper cups. Word had spread. It always did in Lead Creek. The old fire truck sat where Russ had left it. Red paint faded. Chrome bell dull with age. The last survivor of Station 8. And towering above it stood the crusher. Yellow steel. Massive hydraulic jaws. Patient. Waiting. A diesel engine rumbled nearby. Workers prepared equipment. Nobody noticed Russ at first. Then someone pointed. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The same people who had looked away from him days earlier now stared openly. Russ climbed out. Boone followed. Harold stepped down carefully from the truck. A hush moved through the crowd. Many recognized him immediately. Some hadn't seen him in years. Others thought he was already dead. Harold ignored them. His eyes never left the fire truck. For a moment, the old firefighter simply stood there, looking at a machine that had once carried his entire life. Then he touched the badge in his hand and kept walking. Near the crusher stood Martin Briggs and Ethan. Both looked surprised, then concerned, then angry. Ethan recovered first. "What is this?" Russ didn't answer. Instead, he opened the rear door of the truck. One by one, he removed the evidence. The journal, the folders, the photographs, the recorded cassette, the financial records. Everything. A murmur spread through the crowd. People moved closer. Martin Briggs looked suddenly pale. Harold stepped forward. His voice carried farther than anyone expected. Jack Mercer was innocent. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the machinery seemed quieter. Harold held up the badge. "I was there." The old firefighter's hands trembled. His voice didn't. The town lied about him. The crowd shifted uneasily. People exchanged looks. Names were recognized. Memories resurfaced. Questions returned. Russ began laying documents across the hood of a pickup. One by one. Evidence replacing rumors. Facts replacing stories. Ethan's confidence began cracking. "You can't prove anything." His voice sounded smaller now, less certain. Russ held up the financial records. The crowd leaned closer. Then Harold played the cassette. Jack Mercer's voice drifted across the frozen salvage yard. People froze. Some covered their mouths. Others lowered their eyes. The dead firefighter spoke directly into the morning air. The truth finally leaving hiding. Every sentence tightened the pressure around the Briggs family. Every name. Every date. Every fact. Then came the section about Ethan. The crowd reacted immediately. Murmurs, shock, disbelief, a few angry voices. Ethan's face drained of color. His grandfather closed his eyes. For the first time, Martin Briggs looked old, very old. The recording ended. No one spoke. Then a deputy stepped forward from the crowd. Apparently, he had been listening the entire time. Behind him came another, and another. Their expressions had changed. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Ethan took one step backward, then another. Russ noticed it immediately. So did Boone. The shepherd's ears lifted. His body stiffened. Watching, tracking, the same look he had worn beside the hidden compartment. Ethan suddenly turned. Fast. Too fast. He lunged toward the table holding the evidence. Several folders slipped. Documents scattered. The crowd shouted. Boone exploded forward. The old shepherd moved faster than anyone expected. He intercepted Ethan before the younger man reached the records. Not attacking, blocking, protecting, exactly as he had done all week. Ethan stumbled, lost balance, then ran, toward his pickup. The truck engine roared to life. Tires spun across gravel. Deputies shouted. People jumped aside. Russ moved instinctively. Years of training, years of reflex. He pushed Harold backward, away from danger. The pickup surged forward. Then everything happened at once. Boone saw it first. The truck wasn't heading toward the road. It was heading directly toward Russ. The shepherd never hesitated. He sprinted, intercepting, protecting, just as he always had. The impact came with a sickening sound. The crowd screamed. Boone disappeared beneath the side of the truck. The pickup fishtailed, then slammed into a stack of scrap metal. Silence followed. Terrible silence. Deputies rushed Ethan immediately. Within seconds, he was on the ground. Handcuffs clicked shut. Nobody cared. Nobody was looking at Ethan anymore. Russ was already running. His knees screamed, his lungs burned, none of it mattered. The world narrowed to one point, one place, one friend. Boone lay motionless on the gravel. Snowflakes drifted onto his fur. Blood stained the white ground beneath him. Russ dropped beside him. For a second, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. couldn't hear anything except the ringing inside his own head. Then Boone's ear twitched, just once. A tiny movement, small, but alive. Russ closed his eyes. The breath he released trembled. "Stay with me, brother." His voice cracked. The shepherd's eyes opened halfway, clouded, tired, still fighting, still trying. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. People surrounded them. The crusher stood forgotten. The fire truck remained untouched. The truth had survived. Jack Mercer had been vindicated. The Briggs family's lies were collapsing. None of it mattered to Russ at that moment. Because Boone was lying in his arms. And for the first time since they met, the old German shepherd looked fragile. Very fragile. As the ambulance pulled into the salvage yard, Russ realized something. They had won. But the cost of victory was not finished being counted. For 3 days, Russ barely left the veterinary hospital. The world outside continued moving. Lead Creek buzzed with rumors. Newspaper reporters arrived. State investigators appeared. The Briggs family's empire began unraveling piece by piece. Russ noticed almost none of it. His entire world fit inside a small recovery room. Boone slept beneath white blankets. Machines hummed softly nearby. Every breath the old German shepherd took felt like a victory. The first night, Russ sat in a metal chair beside him. The second night, too. And the third. He slept only when exhaustion forced him to. Even then, never for long. Every unfamiliar beep woke him instantly. Every opening door pulled him upright. Years earlier, those reflexes had belonged to a soldier. Now they belonged to an old man guarding his best friend. On the morning of the 4th day, Boone finally opened both eyes. Russ had been staring out the window when he heard a soft whine. He turned immediately. The shepherd was awake, weak, confused, alive. For a moment, neither moved. Then Boone's tail tapped once against the blanket. Russ laughed, a rough sound, the kind that arrives suspiciously close to tears. "About time, brother." Boone's ears twitched. The old dog drifted back to sleep. Satisfied, as if waking long enough to reassure Russ had been the entire mission. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Investigations expanded. The evidence hidden by Jack Mercer proved overwhelming. Financial records, witness statements, the cassette, the journal. Every piece fit together. The truth finally had more weight than the lies. Ethan Briggs accepted responsibility for the stolen community funds. Additional charges followed. Others soon followed him. Some quietly resigned. Some publicly apologized. Most simply disappeared from local politics. Martin Briggs stepped away from public life entirely. The old council president looked smaller every time Russ saw him. Not defeated, just tired. Like a man finally forced to look at the damage his family had left behind. The town slowly changed. Not overnight. Truth rarely worked that way. But it changed. People began speaking Jack Mercer's name differently. Respect returned. Stories resurfaced. Memories emerged from garages, basements, and old photo albums. The villain became a hero again, exactly as he should have been. The county purchased the old fire truck before the crusher ever touched it. Station 8 would survive. Restoration crews spent months repairing rust, replacing panels, and rebuilding damaged sections. The faded red paint returned. The chrome bell shined once more. Children began stopping to watch the work. Former firefighters volunteered their time. Retired mechanics appeared with tools. Entire weekends disappeared beneath laughter and stories. Nobody paid them. Nobody needed to. Some things were worth saving. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the day at the crusher, workers removed several interior panels during the final restoration. One of them discovered something unexpected, a small metal box, hidden deep inside the rear section of the truck, far beyond the compartment Boone had originally found. The restoration foreman called Russ immediately. An hour later, he arrived at the new Fire Station 8 Heritage Museum. Boone walked beside him, still alive, still loyal, though now he carried a slight limp that would never fully disappear. Russ secretly loved the limp. It reminded him the dog was still here. The metal box sat on a workbench, waiting. The room grew quiet as Russ opened it. Inside rested a single envelope. Nothing more. The handwriting on the front was instantly recognizable. Jack Mercer. The room seemed to shrink. Russ carefully unfolded the letter. The first line stole his breath. To the next man who feels forgotten. Nobody spoke. Even the workers stopped moving. Russ continued reading. Jack wrote about loneliness, about being blamed, about carrying burdens nobody could see, about surviving long enough to believe the world had moved on without you. But most of all, he wrote about worth. A person's worth. Not the kind measured by money or reputation. The kind measured by what they choose when nobody is watching. Halfway through the letter, Russ had to stop. Not because the words were difficult, because his vision blurred. He stared out the museum window until he could continue. Then he read the rest. Slowly, carefully. 3 separate times he paused. 3 separate times the room waited patiently. Nobody hurried him. Everyone understood. The letter ended with a simple sentence. You matter more than your worst day. Silence followed. The good kind. The kind that settles deep. The kind that stays. The official museum dedication took place 2 weeks later. The entire town attended. Families filled the valley. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders. Former firefighters wore old uniforms. Veterans stood together near the front. Harold Quinn attended too. 93 now. Still stubborn. Still impossible to keep home. The restored fire truck sat proudly beneath the autumn sun. Its bell gleamed. Its paint shined. Its story finally belonged to the truth. When the ceremony ended, people lingered. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Russ eventually found a quiet spot on the museum steps. Boone settled beside him. Golden leaves drifted through the valley. The mountains glowed orange and gold beneath the afternoon light. Peace. Real peace. The kind he hadn't felt in years. A young boy wandered over, maybe 8 years old. Freckles. Cowboy boots. Curious eyes. He studied Russ for a moment, then looked at Boone, then at the fire truck. Finally, he asked the question, Were you ever a hero? Russ smiled. The same question had followed veterans his entire life. He looked at Boone. The old shepherd stared across the valley, watching everything, as always. Then Russ looked toward the mountains, toward the restored fire truck, toward the place where Jack Mercer had finally come home. And he answered, No. The boy seemed surprised. Russ scratched behind Boone's ears. But I was saved by one. The boy followed his gaze toward the fire truck, then down toward the shepherd. Understanding slowly appeared. A moment later, a breeze moved through the valley. The polished bell on Station 8 rang softly. One clear note, gentle, bright. The sound drifted across the mountains, across the town, across the years, and for the first time in a very long time, nothing felt forgotten anymore. If Russ, Boone, and Jack Mercer's story touched your heart, leave a simple one in the comments below. Just a single number. Because sometimes one loyal dog, one honest man, and one act of courage are enough to change everything. And if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten at some point in your life, leave a 2 so others know they're not alone. We read every comment, and we'd love to hear where you're watching from today. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are many more powerful stories of courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances waiting just ahead. And trust me, the next story may stay with you long after it's over. We'll see you in the next one.